to get as much sort of group work and peer work and board work done as I can, but I do have to get us into reading Greek, because that's why we teach this by and large. I mean, I am also increasingly to turn up the intensity with the enunciation, with the spoken ancient Greek, slowly. But my primary remit here in this department, as in any classics department, is to get you to read primary sources in the end, to be able to read the Greek in its original, with all the richness of experience that comes with that. And unfortunately, we are incredibly short-staffed for that, which is why what would ordinarily be 4 semesters of Greek we cram into 3. And it's a big difference in time. So I do what I can. It's seriously, we talk about this in our department ad nauseum about how best to do this, and we never reached any firm conclusions, just in general patterns of how to go about things. And every cohort had to deal with it differently. I'm going to revise all the PowerPoints and so forth, because every cohort that I deal with has got different sort of, different capacities for language learning, interests in the language learning, and so forth. So I'm always trying to adjust to the class a little bit. It's tricky, for sure. So bear with me, please. All right, so I'm going to deal with third declension. I'm going to review it. I'm going to review it real quickly. Why is this not showing up? Let's see. Toggle, damn it. All right. So, third declension. I'm going to deal with it really quickly because I want to introduce us to sort of formally to the non-thematic conjugation. The non-thematic conjugation is going to look somewhat familiar because you've had experience with some of the more common, although sometimes slightly irregular, non-thematic presents like themi, right? So I'm just going to, you're introduced to it in the first chapter of your textbook. So I want to make sure I've sort of given my gloss to it. All right, so third declension nouns, what we sort of went over by way of exercise yesterday, and when we have a quorum again, I hope tomorrow, we're going to do a little bit more of. But again, I'm going to try to get us into some sight reading as well this week. But I especially want to go over the basileus type, the ictus that we did the other day, and explain some of the details of it. But then they're also in here. So third declension nouns, here is something I've shown you before in 2 separate PowerPoint presentations. This is the breakdown of how third declension nouns are formed, right? This is an attempt to sort of summarize, to recapitulate all of the rules. So, basic third declension masculine and feminine nouns are, well, it's not going to be clear on the surface of it sometimes what the nominative singular is, right? So you've seen some examples that have like on the end, or you've seen others, you'll learn others that have ain on the end. And it's not clear. You have pais, which is a sigma on the end, but it's usually, in fact, it's always really, the agentive sigma is in there somewhere. It will sometimes have disappeared in pre-Greek times, so that it no longer appears. But you'll have an agentive sigma, right? And it will not be a sigma that has the characteristic second declension O there. So that's one pattern. Notice I'm talking about masculine and feminine, by the way. So it's not going to be like the second declension that has O sigma, and it's not the singular. The genitive does have an S in it, as I pointed out before. It's like the possessive S in English. Notice it takes the O grade, though, of the vowel, O. And when I put V in parentheses here, I mean it sometimes may be preceded with a vowel, and that's going to color how that omicron is realized. So sometimes it'll be quantitative metathesis. So we go from long vowel A, right, to short O to short vowel, long vowel. The classic example of that being the type polis type, right? So the genitive singular goes from being pol-e-os to pol-e-os in Attic Greek, right? the quantity, as we say, of the vowel switches places, and that's characteristic of Attic Greek. Dative singular, there should be no problems at this point, right? We know that the dative singular is always in iota of some form, even if it's below the line in writing. Again, it may be preceded by a vowel, and that may turn this into a diphthong. Then we have accusative. Now, this is causing a little bit of trouble. We have accusative that's either an N, which we've seen before in the accusative singulars of other declensions. We've seen the first declension, we've seen the second declension, or it's a. The short rule about this is as follows. It is going to be N, new, pronounced as new, if it follows any vowel. Thank you. And when I say vowel in this instance, what I'm going to say is when it follows anything that's recognized as a vowel in Greek. Now that might seem like a strange distinction. Why, we know what our vowels are in Greek essentially, right? Alpha, epsilon, iota, or eta, iota, and so forth. Omicron and Ketelepa. I make the distinction because if I talk about inherited vowels, or Indo-European vowels, there are only two, curiously enough. So the things that are inherited vowels are e and o, or their long versions, e and o. Those are the inherited vowels. I mean Greek vowels, which include iota, upsilon, and so forth. Vocative is going to be hard to guess in the singular. It's either going to be the same as the nominative, a familiar pattern, or it's going to be the stem of the noun by itself, without any endings. In the same way, we have despotes in the second declension, but despota as the vocative, right, for master. Nominative plural, masculine, feminine. I'm reminding you here, masculine and feminine types only. Plural is with an S, like the English plural ending, but notice it's the epsilon grade, the E grade, so it's not to be confused with the genitive singular. Nothing unfamiliar here, right? Genitive plural never lets you down. It always ends in on. Doesn't always take the accent, though. All right, dative, the old dative ending, si. So si is going to sometimes combine in writing with the preceding consonant or vowel. So it's going to, if it's preceded by a g or a k or a k, then it will be written with a xi. So you have to remember that there's a spelling rule involved. If you're using the Ionic alphabet, you cannot legitimately write kappa sigma iota, right? You have to make the kappa sigma into a xi. In older Greek epigraphy, it will be written that way, but that's not what we're dealing with right now. Accusative, right, plural. Again, much like what's going on over here, the ending is going to be ins or as. But this ins ending is going to then again go through a transformation. And I'll write that on the board in a moment. I'll show you what happens when vowels, you have the combination vowel, nu, sigma. As Maya pointed out yesterday, it seems like sigmas in Attic Greek are really peculiar about who they're close to, right? They're really particular, and they are. They tend to really mess around with what's adjacent to them and change them in some fashion. And then unsurprisingly, the vocative is like the nominative in the plural, right? That's a typical pattern. You've seen that before. Now, much as in the second declension, on the one hand, there's a masculine or feminine form, and on the other, there's a separate neuter variation on the declension. So you'll remember, I hope, that in the second declension, we can have masculine and feminines that end in the nominative singular os, right? Like ho, agros, the field, like he, hodos, the path or the way. And then we have another type for the neuters, to, dendron, right, with an N ending. So likewise, the third declension has a separate sub-declension of neuters. And it's easier to remember, fewer things to remember. One of the things that it doesn't have is it doesn't have your agentive sigma, anything that marks the agent, the agency. And this is sort of evidence we have the neuter declension, actually the neuter gender rather, it started out originally as being an inactive gender. And in fact, Hittite, as it happens, maintains that pattern. It has what's called common gender, and this neuter gender. Common gender being agents, and other gender being inactive things, inanimate things. All right, so nominative is the stem by itself, less ending, less this characteristic sigma. And one of the things that patterns we should remember, a few people are slipping up on this, but it's a lot to remember in Greek, is that if we know what the nominative is, we automatically know what the accusative is in both singular and plural, because they're always identical to each other in the neuters, irrespective of the declension. And the other thing we always know is that the nominative, and by perforce necessarily the accusative, of any neuter will end in a, short a. But notice I've written vowel in parenthesis here, which means that if there's a vowel adjacent to it, attic is not going to leave well enough alone. It's going to make them contract in some fashion if it can. So although the underlying form may be you'll see that there'll be transformations of that And then everything else is pretty much the same. Os for the genitive singular, on, and sid. So fewer things in general to remember about the neuter. That's true of all of your nouns. So some paradigms, right? Masculine, feminine types, right? Kerus, the herald. Notice that reflects the spelling rule, right? Kerukos, keriki, keruka from Why? Because it's not after a vowel. It's after a consonant, and sometimes if it's after a hidden consonant, like a digamma, right? One that's left to trace, the nu is reflected as a. Kerukes, kerukon, right, has to change to shift an accent because of the final long ultima. Keruksi, notice that's just a spelling rule again. Kappa sigma is written as xi in the Ionic alphabet. The Ionic alphabet being the alphabet that was borrowed pretty much across the whole of Greece. It was certainly borrowed in Athens by around 400 BCE. Kerukas, from kerukns. Right? Again, same rule applies here. Unts, after your consonant is us. Get a question? All right. Neuter T stem, right? So this is a technical neuter pattern, right? Soma, somatos, right? The body, much like, right, the seed, sperma, that you got in the last textbook. Nominative is soma. That is the raw stem because the underlying form is somat. But you hope you remember now that there's this rule in Greek about deleting final vowels. Greek doesn't tolerate them. So somat, somatos, somati equals nominative equals nominative. Easy. Somat, easy. Right? You know that neuter plurals Somaton, accent has to shift places, but it doesn't run all the way to the end. It just has to move over one syllable because of the final long ultima. Somati, this is what Mikhail was instructing us on in the last class. The underlying form is somatsi, but Greek doesn't tolerate that, deletes the dental, the ta or the duh that precedes any sigma. Modern Greek is full of them. But ancient Greek, Attic Greek doesn't tolerate them. In fact, no ancient dialectic Greek tolerates them. Sometimes geminates that makes them double sigmas. All right, so that's one neuter pattern. And again, I'm going to run through these fairly quickly because you should already have this information handy. It's not the first time. In fact, it might be the third time we've gone over most of these forms. But I'm hoping to jog your memory and maybe fill in some gaps in your mind as after yesterday's little exercise at the board. You know, places where you were uncertain. Right, Pais we had. I noticed I didn't write the child because this can either be masculine or feminine. Whole Pais or Hey Pais. Right? Pais from Pais. But again, the dental gets deleted. Paidos, Paidi, Paida. This is one of those simplicia. When I talk about something that's a simple stem, I'll sometimes refer to it as the simplex. And the plural simplicia. That has the really an old inherited shifting accent pattern in it. It's a characteristic that is inherited from the European languages. So pais, paidos, paidi, paida, right? Paidus, paidon. Some of these you'll actually see the shift to the genitive plural as well. Paise, paidos, or paidos. So that's just another, this is just an example of a dental stem, masculine and feminine type. But it has this old-fashioned shifting accent. I try to avoid giving you those, and I succeeded in not giving you any of those yesterday. I gave you only ones that would shift. If there was any shifted accent, you'd be able to determine it, not by knowing what the inherited accent pattern was, but by knowing what your limitation law was, or knowing something about final law and ultima, that sort of thing, right? That's going to affect the initial position accent given in the nominative singular. Right? Here's a good example. What Attic Greek has your quantitative metathesis. So the city, polis, poleos, pole, polin, right? Pole, if you shout at cities, that's what it would be. But people would say, oh, pole, right? Oh, pole, oh, city. I don't know whether it's attested, but it probably is. Polis. Now, the rule about contracting epsilon epsilon in Attic Greek is if the accent is on the epsilon, first epsilon, that's going to contract ace as well, the circumflex. If the accent is off it completely, it will still contract the ace. Ace, notice I'm making a diphthong. But if the accent is on the epsilon, the second epsilon, then it becomes an eta. That's when it becomes an eta. And I'll take the acute. Yeah.
When is it on the second epsilon?
Not in the plural forms, but in, for example, if komein, I was coming or going with an eta. Because that's right, sorry. So that's okay. Poleon, policy, police. Notice what happens here. This is what happens to ends. So what I'm gonna scribble up here really quick is just a quick reminder about some contractions. In Attic Greek, this is an Attic, and to a lesser extent, Ionic Attic. So a plus n plus sa becomes as. E plus un plus sa equals ace. O plus n, u plus sigma becomes us. And then one you're going to see in a moment is upsilon plus nu plus sigma is long upsilon sigma. Just much like what happens to this long alpha here. Now, in each case, well, there are two ways to think about this. One is you can very simply think, as a lot of textbooks tell you, that the nu becomes deleted, but it leaves a pronounced trace of its having been there, and that leads to what's called compensatory lengthening of the sitting vowel. That's what compensatory lengthening means. Something gets deleted, but it leaves a trace in the lengthening of the vowel essentially there, even if it's written as a diphthong in some fashion. The other way to think about it, though, and I think this is a little bit more accurate, is in every case you're actually dealing with this, the reflex of this before sigma, which is already semi-vocalic. And that this then becomes an in the circumstance, becomes an in that circumstance, becomes an o in that circumstance, becomes an u in that circumstance. So equals equals ace, o equals u equals u. Right? So we've seen those are common contraction rules you already know. The things I go through. The links I go to say silly things. Now, some of you might wonder, why is there this iota epsilon back and forth? And that has to do with the fact that what you're dealing with in a form like polis is ablaut. Ablaut, right? A-B-L-A-U-T. Ablaut is a Germanism, obviously, and it's a really shorthand way of saying vowel gradation. That's why we actually use the German word, because unlike most German words, it only has 2 syllables. Right, so, but vowel gradation has more, has 4. So vowel gradation is another inherited feature of the European languages, and it means that you get alternation between what's called a full grade of something and its null grade, and the full grade can be and sometimes the full grade is o. So what's going on here is the stem of this is actually pol, and I'm going to put the epsilon in parenthesis, I. Now this is where it's important to recall what is meant by an Indo-European vowel. Because an Indo-European vowel, an inherited vowel, is only ever going to be o or o. Right? Those are the only vowels that, right, technically in Indo-European. And why technically? Because they're the only ones that ever undergo ablaut. So by definition, they're the only vowels that are, because inherited U and I don't. So what happens is we're getting an alternation between the 0 grade, in other words, without the vowel here, and the full grade, which has the vowel epsilon in it. But then there's a further rule. And this is a rule which occasionally you're not really going to have to know a whole lot about, but there's a rule that says in Greek that if you have the combination epsilon, iota, vowel, the iota is deleted. That's why it becomes from being poleios to poleos.
Is the pattern for the outflow always nominative, accusative, genitive?
Yes. I say with some hesitation because the genitive plural is not always friendly. So it's like the Basilius type. That's the same thing, as you might have noticed. And actually, I'm going to come to that in a moment. All right. So for those of you who care, as an example of ablaut, we'll come back to ablaut because you've encountered ablaut before. You've encountered ablaut in the non-thematic verbs, present tense, where there's an alternation, for example, in femi between femi, but first plural, amen. It alternates between a and a. Ablaut also explains the so-called irregular past tenses in English, right? Get but got, alternating. All the European languages exhibit this inherited pattern. All right, so that's city. All right, this is one that's causing a lot of people trouble. And it's causing people trouble for 2 reasons. One is that they'll see the nominative singular form of this and ignoring the gender to begin with. They'll see a word like telos, and they think it's got os in the end. It must be second declension. But it isn't. And that's why the dictionary will give you both the to form, and if you know that it's neuter, to start with, you know immediately it can't be second declension, because for neuter and second declension, it would be what? To, not an existent word, but you can make one up. For neuter and second declension, how would it end? Telo, and there's no such word. So you know immediately that it can't be second declension. The other problems, so the dictionary not only gives you that, but it also tells you that the genitive singular is telus in Attic Greek. So that's a tip-off that you're dealing with a third declension now. The other problem people are having with this is this exhibits a lot of contraction. Because of a deletion rule and because of Attic's habit of not leaving well enough alone when it comes to putting vowels adjacent to each other. So, the neuter S stems, and there's actually another sort that ends in os, but we're not going to deal with that right now, like katos, horn. The nominative singular is going to have the characteristic os on the end. But the underlying stem is teles. So what you actually have here is not E0 alternating, you're having E0 alternating. Another characteristic pattern of the European languages. So telos, but tel-es-os, plus deletion, ends up with tel-e-os, and that's where Greek stops. As far as Herodotus and Homer are concerned, that's the genitive singular of the end. Teleos. But Attic can't leave it alone as a telos. right? Tele, nothing unexpected there, and because it's neuter, everything else falls into place in the accusative and vocative. Plural, nothing unexpected here in terms of how it's composed. All neuter plurals, nominative and accusative, end in a, but Attic takes teles a, deletes the sigma, telea, and guess what? That's where Ionic Greek leaves it alone. But Attic can't leave it alone, and takes telea and makes it tele. So those are the two problems that people have with knowing how to first identify a neuter S stem of this sort, and how to then decline it properly. Firstly, because you see the os and they rush in and think they're dealing with a second declension noun, and they're not. So you have to recognize that it's neuter, which is an immediate tip off that it can't be second declension if it ends in os, and then remembering the contractions. Basilius, right? Deal with that tomorrow. But one of the things you might notice here is because the underlying stem has the u, the w in it, right? The consonantal reflex of upsilon, that the trace of it stands in the way of contractions. In fact, it stands in the way of any contraction with a vowel that is back and rounded. So it will not contract if the following vowel is any sort of o or a. But it will contract if the following vowel is e or e, which are front and up vowels in the mouth. Now that's also a pattern you happen to have seen, because pleo does the same thing. I sail. Pleo, but place, play. Pleo, men. Plete, pleusi. It doesn't contract if the following vowel is o, but it does contract if the following vowel is e. That's a rule in Attic. So basileos doesn't become oos or anything of the sort. So the trace of the w there. And if you shouted kings, good luck, right? So ho king, you might say. Please don't behead me. All right, so nasal stems you've had. I'm going a little gamut, right? Notice here you actually do have a sigma hidden in there. In fact, I've kind of misleadingly written this in Greek characters for consistency's sake, but this rule about ons that can be on is Proto-European. It goes way back. It's called Semereni's law, and it's on that sheet I gave you. So that's why not always going to see the characteristic sigma, even if it's back in there somewhere in the history of things. Nothing unexpected here, but notice because that has that compensatory lengthening, that in all the cases in which there is no need for compensatory lengthening, it's the absence of a sigma, the on becomes short again. That paradigm, and agamemnon declines in the same fashion. And you've not had many of these, but the shepherd, opoimen, from ends, has that same pattern though. Except notice that its vocative is annoyingly the same as the nominative singular. Poimensi. That's what you'd expect, but maybe why would it become poimesi? Because this is known as, this is formation on analogy. This ought to actually read poimsi, poimasi, with ah. And we actually have that in some dialect. But Attic actually just completes the paradigm and analogy with the epsilon. So it's a weird exception to the rule. All right, I'm taking more time than I wanted to. Third declension adjectives. You had some of these. The first ones you had were your participles, active participles, and also you might now know the aorist passive participles form the same way. Ace, asa, n, right? And the nominative are the aorist passive participles endings. So I'm not going to belabor this, but just recall that masculine and neuter forms of these present active participles, but also now you know, as of at least before the day, aorist passive participles are third declension dental stems, stems. we have an S stem sort of adjective. Unlike S stem nouns of the sort we've just studied, however, their nominative singular is not in os, it's in es. Should not be any surprise here. This is actually from es, right? Compensatory lengthening. Whereas the neuter doesn't have the extra sigma and just remains s. But other than this difference in the singular form between os and es, the declension is the same. Notice it's us from esos, right? And a from ea, and so forth. So this has a masculine and feminine form, ale des, right? And ale des for true. This incidentally is a compound word. It means that thing which does not lie hidden. River Lethe is the river of forgetfulness, right? So if it's ale face, it means that it is that which does not lie hidden, that which is not forgotten. It's the truth. Type you've just had. This is actually a mixed declension where the masculine and neuter are third declension, but the feminine is first. And its pattern is a little bit stranger, but notice it has the characteristic endings eos, e. Now, this is another example of ablaut. Apparently, this is an alternation between 0 here and e there, without any intervening vowel, Greek vowel. So it's bar 0 us, but bar e os, with a w there. So this is heavy, and it's related this is for Louis' sake, it's related to Latin gravis, because the underlying form of this is guarus, which becomes ba in historic and alphabetic Greek. All right, that was a really quick but deliberately so review of your third declensions. Did it fill any gaps from yesterday at all?
Yes.
Yeah?
Yeah, that was helpful.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, well, that's helpful, yeah. There is a lot to take in. One of the things that, learning Greek and learning Latin, learning any language, I suppose, but perhaps Greek is just so very unfamiliar from an English speaker's point of view, requires is that you have to be just really meticulous when you're trying to form these things, right? If I ask you to compose something, you have to think to yourself, am I omitting anything which is crucial to the stem of the word? If I am, can I justify it? And am I adding anything to the stem which doesn't belong there? And if I am, how would I justify it? So what I see people do is they sometimes write things out and then they'll sort of leave out a crucial vowel, like the e of Basilius or something of the sort. Or they'll throw in a letter, because I don't know why. They'll just throw in an extra stem letter, a tau or something, which they need to account for. If you can account for it, great. But you have to be really meticulous in stringing things together in composition. But that has another side to it, and that is that when you go and read them, right, when you read these words, you're going to become, I hope, more meticulous in analyzing the word, especially unfamiliar words for the first time, and go, can I account for all of the parts that are here before I rush in and try to determine what the meaning is? What does that ending mean? What does that suffix mean? What does that stem mean? What does that prefix mean? Right? Don't add anything that doesn't need to be added there, and don't omit anything when trying to come up with translation for it. So they're sort of two sides of the same coin, right? Learning how to form these things, sort of the composition exercises give you, not just the paradigm exercises, and also learning how to identify things carefully on the page as you read them. All right, we only have 6 minutes left, but I'm going to just at least start you out talking a little bit of the non-thematic conjugation of the present tense. And these are reduplicating types, but they're all reduplicating, so that's why I put that in parenthesis. And look, they also ablaut. Just fun to say. Dinner party words. Let me tell you about ablaut. I know all about ablaut. I did it in tuba a long time ago. All right, so these are introduced in this chapter of, I think that's A2, and I'm going to give you the classic paradigms of them. So, right, histemi, set up to make stand. And it sometimes has an active meaning, to stand, as you'll see. And in the middle, it does certainly have it has an active meaning, to stand oneself up, right? Now, that's the underlying form of this. That's the view of the Indo-European form. But I'm going to concentrate on a couple of things here. Firstly, you've seen these endings before, okay? So, me, sa, analogical sigma, the thematic conjugation. Si. Si being what happens to t after a vowel, between vowels, right? Or as I say, vowel, tau, iota becomes si, to be precise. Mente, nsi. So those are all the endings you've already seen. You've seen them in fe mi, right? Fe mi, but fa men, right? Fe si, but fa si. You might remember from speak. There is above here. It goes from long plus H2 to nothing. And H2 by itself is ah. Now, you don't need to know that. And it does explain why not all of those that in Attic Greek have a, me in them are going to ablaut with ah. Some of them are going to ablaut with eh, as you'll see in a moment. It is reduplicated. Histemi, it reduplicates the sigma. But initial sigma in Greek, just to remind you, always becomes a rough breathing in Attic Greek. Some Ionic dialects just get rid of it completely. So histemi, histes, and that's stand. That's just like English stand. We just have one of those funny new prefix suffixes on the end of it, right? Like you've seen in Montano. So it's the same stem as the English word stand. All right, so middle forms. The middle forms of these will always take the zero or reduced grade of the vowel. So notice the alternation in the active voice is full grade, reduced, it's sometimes called in Greek, or zero grade, properly speaking here. In plural, also going to be true of the dual, which you don't have to deal with yet. It's going to take the ah grade in this case, and the middle will always take that ah, yeah.
Is it always, well, generally, can we say that it's supposed to be full grade in the singular? And
always full grade in the singular, yep. And I'll show you that pattern. Always full grade in the singular, active. Right? In the plural, active, reduced, and the middle, reduced across the board. But notice the peculiarity I've underlined here. That psi, which is you've already learned to contract, like in your thematic conjugation, right? It goes from being si to ai to a, because this ah is a result of this, not actually a vowel. It's a result of this underlying trace of a consonant. That H2 doesn't contract as a rule. Now, Ionical's a nice mess with it. So the psi comes back. The psi is back, and it stays there. Doesn't contract. Now, this is going to be confusing for you, because modern Greek, by analogy, has put psi, or se, as it said in modern Greek, back in the entire paradigm. All of the conjugations. So you're going to have to remember that in ancient Greek, it generally contracts and add it to a. But here, it comes back. All right. Otherwise, everything is like you've seen before. Meta, ste, untai. And I'll pick up this thread in due time. So, secondary middle, right? Imperfect tense. Nothing to do there except that so, which you're accustomed to seeing contract, doesn't contract. Here. So so is underlined there. All right, we're just about out of time of class, but let me just really quickly show you what I mean by the ablaut pattern, just to reinforce this point. So another paradigmatic type is this, to put to place, titemi, from this. You might recall Graspin's law forbids there being two aspirates and adjacent consonants. The first one becomes deaspirated, hence t, not t, right? This is to put or to place. It's related to the word thesis, the thing you put down. And it's actually where we get the ed of the so-called regular past tense in English, in the Germanic languages. Because what you're saying is, I work did, I work placed. It's actually where the word did does come from in English as well. So this is, notice the underlying form of this involves this thing called H1, which is why the oblate pattern is full but here, But what's true of the previous paradigm is true also here. Singular, active, full, plural, and dual, as it happens, reduced, and middle reduced across the board. That's the patterns. And I've just given you, and then I've given you the, an imperfect form here for purpose of illustration. But to take this out of class, I'll just show you the final paradigmatic example of one of these typical reduplicating non-thematic presents. Diddle me to give. You're dealing with something called an H3. And the H3 causes this to be long o. And in the middle, unsurprisingly, right? So you see the pattern. Singular's going to the long form. Now, if you're really wondering what the hell are these H things, why are they making my life difficult? We're not entirely sure how they were pronounced. There's a really interesting story of how somebody discovered them. Ferdinand Saussure, a Swiss linguist, hypothesized them, and in fact, they were then discovered to have reflexes in Hittite. It's a brilliant example of actually linguistics being something of predictive science. But the H1 is called the E coloring, the E coloring. Laryngeal, they're called laryngeals, like your larynx. The H2 is called the A coloring, the A coloring laryngeal. And the H3 is called the O coloring laryngeal. In other words, what they do is they color the preceding vowel towards that vowel sound. And if they stand by themselves, their reflexes will be, in Greek at least, will be respectively E, A, O. They stand by themselves. All right, that's what I got for you for today. Hope that's it. Bye. I hope that the recorded lecture is useful to people, and it's great that you guys are doing that and using the PowerPoints. I'll upload the PowerPoint ASAP so you guys can review it. And tomorrow, I hope we have a quorum for doing some more stuff on the board for a bit, and then diving into basically the Aeon, which is where we're going at Epidaurus.